Hello, I'm Charles Wyckoff, and it's a privilege to be here with Carmen Puliafito as part of Retina Synthesis. And today we have the absolute honor of interviewing a good friend and colleague of both of ours, Pravin Dugel. Pravin, you have been an incredible leader in our space for a long, long time, certainly before I was a resident. In 2020, you joined Iveric Bio as the Chief Strategy Officer, and then more recently became President, a big role of Iveric Bio. And while we definitely want to get into that sort of transition from clinical practice to Iveric and what that means in your current role, we want to rewind and go back to sort of earlier in your sort of career trajectory here. So to start that, Carmen, go ahead and plant our first question.
Well, Pravin, we know that you're a clinician scientist and now executive, but it all started back at Columbia where you were a comparative literature major. Tell us about that.
Well, Carmen and Charlie, you guys are very kind to invite me here, and thank you for the opportunity. It's particularly an honor to talk to both of you, and both of you have inspired me so much. Look, my path personally as well as professionally has been fairly unconventional. The bottom line is that I actually didn't get into college. I don't know if you know that or not, but I came here from having gone to boarding school in a school right outside of London called Harrow, and I grew up in Europe. And when I came to the U.S., I realized that I was free to go to parties and things like that, and unfortunately, it was the worst time to do that. And the fact of it is, I actually didn't get into college, and I was ready to play squash professionally. And as I was playing in a tournament, there just in what happens to be the Marion Cricket Club, a Columbia squash coach was there, or the Columbia squash coach was there, who happened to recruit me. And it's not that I got in because of academics. I simply got in because they had no one else to play squash, I think. But I was very fortunate to get in. And once I was there, I was actually a little bit ticked off that I couldn't just go into pre-med. They had a 2-year requirement, and I had to take all these classes that I never intended. And of course, I was very young. I hadn't turned quite 16 yet when I first enrolled, and I had to take these classes, and I absolutely loved French and German Renaissance literature, and that's what I ended up doing. And comparative studies at that time involved European literature, and I ended up actually majoring and concentrating in Italian, German, and French Renaissance literature, which was great because I would have never had that opportunity again. I won't tell you if I've read another book since, but I did read lots of books then.
But all through that, go ahead, John.
Go, Charles. Go ahead.
But all through that, you knew you wanted to be a physician. I mean, what an incredible early story, and I didn't know that about you. That's amazing. So before you turned 16, you knew for sure you wanted to be a physician, and and that's where you were headed.
Yeah, Charlie, it's you caught on that. Yeah, so I'm a refugee immigrant, right? So when I was growing up, my father was at political, issues. He was on the other side of the political system in Nepal, and he was in and out of jail. My mother was the first woman who was really educated, outside Nepal, and started an English-speaking school, which is still running today. And my father had always told us, my brother and I, my brother's 5.5 years older than me, to do something that would allow us to be independent. And in his mind, being a doctor would allow us to be independent. I don't think he ever wanted us to be involved in politics or anything because of the issues that he's had. So my brother, who's 5.5 years older, who Carmen knows well, decided that he was going to go into ophthalmology, and he's a cornea refractive surgeon who is now retired. But I simply followed his steps, and I knew that that's what I wanted to do, given my parents' background from being very young, and I simply followed his footsteps. And I decided to work on the back of the eye because I figured I could partner with my brother who worked in the front of the eye, and I could do the back of the eye, and that's kind of how I got into retina.
So when you went on to UCLA for medical school, and then on to USC for your residency and fellowship. And then you headed out to Arizona, a fast-growing place, and you established quite a practice there. Can you tell us a little bit about your choice?
Yeah, Carmen, I gotta say that it's not something that in retrospect I did because I knew anything. It's really more of a chutzpah and naivety that got me where I am. What ended up happening is, look, I was in USC, and my mentor was were Steve Ryan and Ron Smith, and they were very, very good to me. I had the fortune of studying under them, and they guided me to a fellowship with Don Gass and Bascom Palmer, which was the best time that I've ever spent. And the thing that I would say about Don Gass is that he was the finest physician that I've ever met in my life, but he was even a better person than he was a physician. He was just a wonderful person that I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with. So after that, I was in the traditional academic route. And I also realized that there were things that were happening that were really not traditional. And Carmen, you're one of the people that really inspired this in terms of what you did and how you were able to reach out of where you grew up in traditional academics. First you started working with lasers and then OCTs, and then started working with industry. And I realized that really was the path to progress. And you're one of the main people that inspired me as to that. And I realized that to do that, you really needed to do clinical trials. And as young as I was impatient, and I wanted to do clinical trials. It was harder at that time, not anymore, but at that time in an academic institution. And I simply started looking at the demographics and seeing where I could grow a practice, where there were the least number of retina people for the most number of people over the age of 55. And it was Phoenix, Arizona. And very naively, I just joined nothing but a mom and pop practice and got absolutely nowhere for 10 years. I mean, really got nowhere. I'd go to all these meetings that nobody would talk to me, and I got nowhere. But I did have later on, I did have some people that really helped me out a great deal. And again, you were one of them. There are many people that I didn't have the fortune of training with that helped me out a great deal. People like Harry Flynn, for instance, and you and Don D'Amico and others, who took, and Sandy Brucker and many others that I can't mention here as a list, but we're great people that in our field, and they helped me through. We finally started a practice where we developed a large clinical trial center, Charlie, very much like what you've done so well, better than anybody else now. And we grew that very well. And then I got to a point where I started becoming a little bit more entrepreneurial and thinking, what else can we do in medicine? And I realized that the business of medicine in general was limited, but we used a lot of services. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we owned the services that we used? And then we started spinning off companies. And by that time, we had 11 companies. We had real estate companies, we had banking companies, we had an aviation company, for instance. We had 2 planes and 5 pilots. We had a nutraceutical company. We had ASCs with some ASCs. And that all went really well. So I sort of got a taste of being an entrepreneur there. And then the opportunity came to really change my career and sell everything. And that's when I kind of looked back at my personal life and my career and thought, the best things that have happened to me have happened to me when I've stepped outside my comfort zone. And this was the perfect time for me to step outside my comfort zone again. And that's why I took the position that I did, and really have never looked back and been very, very happy since.
That's a phenomenal story and super insightful for a lot of people that are practicing out there that are interested in making small steps and in comparison to your big steps. But backing up one more time, I've seen you present dozens, probably hundreds of times on podium over the last 10 to 15 years. And you really do have a unique ability to synthesize vast amounts of data and then articulate sort of a meaningful, clinically relevant interpretation that people listen to and they hear in really a unique way. And I really found that quite impressive from your sort of podium stances over the years. How do you do that? How do you become the Pravin Dugel presenter on podium? What's your advice to the young retina doctors out there that are in academic, retina, whether that's university-based or private practice, I don't care, but they want to participate. They want to play this game and they want to be part of the movement of research. How do you do that in a way that's meaningful and valuable to the whole community in the way that you have done?
Well, Charlie, first of all, it's very nice of you to say. I'm not sure that that's entirely true, but it's nice of you to say. And from my point of view, it's really, it really is very simple. Nothing really comes naturally in this, at least to me. For a lot of people it does, but it doesn't to me. I'm not really that smart to be able to synthesize all this at once. It really is a struggle to learn these things. And the way that I look at it is to say, look, how do I explain this to somebody, who's smart enough, but not really, in the inner circle of this. And I always think of communication that way. How can I make somebody understand, who's smart enough, but may not be an expert, which is kind of where I am in any of this. And when I learn about whatever it is that I'm presenting, I really did learn about it a lot. I mean, I can't tell you, I'd almost be embarrassed to tell you the number of times that I rehearsed talks and I spent time sort of asking myself questions and answering it. And I guess what I would tell young folks is to say, if you hear a good talk or if you hear somebody give a good discussion, usually, and maybe there are exceptions, and there probably are because we've got such incredibly smart people in our field, but usually it's not a natural process. Usually there's a lot of effort behind that, and you have to be willing to put in that effort. I can't tell you how many times my daughters, when they were young, would come to me and say, "Why are you talking to yourself?" And I was talking to myself for hours, and on a Saturday and Sunday in my office, because I was asking myself questions and I was answering questions because I was anticipating those things. But it does take a lot of effort, but you've got to love doing what you're doing. And then, at a certain time, you look at, people that are the next generation like you, Charlie, and become inspired because you guys have so many more tools than I ever had. And you guys will do so much better in terms of going further. But at the end of the day, it is a lot of effort. But I'm not complaining. It's just the way it is. And the message is, it doesn't come naturally. At least to me, it didn't. It took a lot of effort, but it's very worthwhile effort.
Super insightful. Thank you. And then another question for you. You were one of the early supporters of the Vit-Buckle Society, and this is a group that obviously has sort of resonated with sort of people that are coming out of training and younger in their profession. It's very different. Love the retina societies and macula societies of the world, but it's this younger group that it's focused on. And you were one of the early supporters of that. And everything that you do, I remember year after year, you would fly around to these meetings. You would make an effort to go to sort of the pre-meetings, to prep for the meeting. You were a big supporter of that. How do you find time to support these other groups that are sort of a little peripheral to what your core objectives are in life, and yet you bring so much energy to so many other groups? How do you do that?
Well, it's very simple. I mean, I think I just kind of put the priorities where they are, and my first priority is spending time with my family and my children, and I've never really lost sight of that because that's just the way I've been brought up, and that's still the case. Other than that, I really don't have any other hobbies or life, which is great. I mean, that's not something I complain about. I mean, I don't play golf. I mean, my ADD doesn't allow me to play golf. I collect and I take wine classes, which is what I'm doing now, which is fantastic, which is the only other thing that I do. But I guess what I would say is you've got to love what you do, and I have benefited so much from people that have mentored me when they didn't have to. People that have corrected me when they didn't have to, people that have advised me when they didn't have to, people like Carmen. I mean, I never had the fortune of training under Carmen. I wish I did, but I never did. He came to Bascom after I left, and as you did, But the fact of it is that throughout, my career, he's supported me, mentored me, advised me. And it's just something that I haven't forgotten. And if I'm able to give a little piece of advice to somebody who's younger, look, that's the least that I can do. I don't think I'll be able to match what I got, but I can at least benefit from that. And it's just fun. I mean, it's just fun hanging around younger people. It makes me feel younger. As I lose more and more hair, I feel like, I'm hip again.
Okay, so now bring us full circle to where we started. Now you join Iveric Bio. You supercharge Iveric in an incredible way, and now you're president. Like, what has that transition been like from full-time clinical practice into industry, and what's it like with the Iveric team now?
Well, look, first of all, it's not me doing it. It's a team. But here's what I would say. It's the if there's one message that I want to convey to people, is that the opportunity is enormous, and it's not a one road here. It's a wide open path. What I've learned is, we are on a rocket ship as a community, as a retina community. We have grown so much. And Charlie, this is before you, but I think Carmen can support this. I grew up in an era where we're actually lasering the fovea in order to stop people from getting worse, right? And and that was something that was really the standard of care. And I'm not putting it down, but I'm just thinking of how much progress we've made since then. And it's been lightning speed, faster than any other industry there is. So in many ways, we're immature in our infrastructure. There are lots of people in oncology and rheumatology and other fields that are people like me, who have been in clinic and who are now in industry and sort of form that bridge. But in our field, there's such a dearth of people like that, and there's such a vacuum, there's such a need, that there's all kinds of opportunities for people like that. And if there's an interest, you can really carve out your path any which way. People have done it in many, many ways. People that I really look up to, people like Tom Chula, for instance, and Tom is practicing part of the time and doing this part of the time. People like Gil Kleiman and Emmett Cunningham. Emmett is still practicing, but here part of the time. Gil Kleiman, who Carmen inspired. Gil tells that story to me all the time. That he trained under Carmen as a fellow, and Carmen encouraged him to go to business school and then go ahead and go into industry. Gil is somebody that inspires me. People like that, but they're very few and far between, and there's such a need for that. And for me personally, I looked at this and said, I really need to learn, and I love the learning experience, and it's all or nothing. There's nothing wrong with practice, and I love every minute of practice, but it was time for me to learn something entirely new. And that's the reason that I said, look, if I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this properly, I'm going to spend full time at this and dive into this head first. I'm not saying that's the only way to do this, or even if that's the right way to do this, but I just want to make sure that I make that message clear, which is that there's an enormous opportunity to carve your path, into industry, however it is, be it for a little piece of the pie or a big piece of the pie. It's a great opportunity for people that are looking for that.
Super helpful. And then, from a company perspective, you guys have one pivotal trial completed with very strong positive data, another pivotal trial ongoing, fully enrolled and rapid, very, very rapidly during a COVID environment. Impressive. But then you have a lot of early stage stuff also in development. You guys have a big pipeline. What's most exciting to you in the Iveric pipeline at this point?
Well, I mean, obviously it would be the possibility of Zamora, being approved. And that by far is most exciting, because that is potentially a game changer. At least we feel it is. But what I'm learning as I go through this process is, it's not just turning the card, which you figure, well, you're just gonna, wait until the card is turned. It's the processes that go, to make that a successful conclusion. It's not just the turning the card, it's what happens the day after, right? And the execution of that. It's things that I never understood or realized. How do you build up CMC? How do you build a commercial team? How do you build a medical team? And those are all the things that I'm learning, and I enjoy every bit of learning about that. And the other part of it also, in terms of the pipeline and everything else, is learning about, interacting with people of different expertise. I spend most of my day, talking to people that are investors or analysts or strategics. I also have the opportunity to keep in touch with friends like the both of you, and continue to talk to physicians. But I also still have the chance to talk to patients, which is great. Patients that we meet through physicians. So and I also have the chance to talk to PhDs and scientists and so forth. And I think what I've learned more than anything else is sort of a change in your mindset as a physician. And this is probably why, again, it's kind of a full circle going back to your previous question of why I went to medicine. Part of why my father, I think, encouraged us both to go into medicine is to say, look, you have an entirely independent pathway that's not dependent on a government, that's not dependent on an institution, if that's what you choose, which is great. So we self-select ourselves to be fairly independent people. And I realized that's the way I was all this time. It was, look, this is my path. This is what I'm going to do. Either you're with me or you're not, kind of thing. And there was really not such a need to be as collaborative as there is now. Now I'm in a different field where, what I do is I collaborate with people and try to align them in a certain direction, which is a change in sort of how you think and a change in a mentality. It's not good or bad, it's just different. And I'm learning that now, which is also a fantastic learning experience. So the learning experience is not just the technical part, not just the industry part or the discipline part. The learning experience is also really introspective learning experience of, what you did well, what you didn't do well, what you have to learn, what you have to change. And it's been a fantastic journey altogether.
Certainly impacted the field tremendously, and we look forward to watching your career continue to impact all of us. Thanks so much, Pravin. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Well, look, I would never be where I am without the two of you as friends, inspirations, and mentors. And Carmen as a mentor that I've had from the time that I started, and I'll never forget that. And Charlie, you as a shining light in the retina, somebody that I knew when you first came out of training. So I've been very blessed to know both of you. Thank you.